Um, Happy New Year. It's going to be an interesting one, isn't it? um, Chris Mays was just telling me he gets to go to New Zealand for a number of months, and I think he's ultimately going to wind up there. So he'll be safe, relatively. Yeah, it's quite a doozy. It's interesting to even, I mean, I definitely don't want to talk politics or definitely don't want to talk election, but just the whole, wow, just on the level of like maintaining a sense of sanity and humor and connection and not submitting to paranoia and not submitting to fear and yet paying attention and being smart and I just, I know people who are like, I'm not going to be in the country. I'm going to be gone. I'm not coming back to the United States for a while. I got a friend who's an American, but he lives in Australia. So he has the space to be completely dark. It's like kind of like having kids. Like if you have kids, you can't be completely pessimistic about the future. It just doesn't make sense. So it's like a program kicks in where you got to be like, well, we'll make it through da da da. And if you don't have kids, you can be like, yeah, no, I wouldn't have kids at all. This is going down the tubes. And so my friend, who's an American, lives in Australia. I just saw him. He was here briefly, and I said, "So when are you going to come back?" And he goes, "It might be a while." I'm not coming back till you guys go through this Civil War thing. And I'm like, no, 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 I don't want to hear about it. Don't want to hear about it. And then he like laid out one scenario for me. And I was like, no, 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 I don't want to hear about it. But like the not wanting to hear about it thing isn't really going to work very, very long. So I'm happy to talk about that actually later on because it's been on my mind a little bit in terms of just, you can be a little silly about it and say, well, it's another opportunity for practice, but it is. And with uncertainty and fear and ideas about other people, your own ideas, and how to find the heart and how to find connection and how to use the situation to drive your own better angels. So anyway, I'm just throwing it out there because I don't know how you were, but like my thing is that I just gave myself 2023. I was like, yeah, things are weird. Fine, 2023. It's a little eye in the storm. Yeah, bad shit happened. Turn all Middle East horrible, but whatever. I'm just not going to really start drinking the bitter brew until, well, now it's 2024, so I don't have that block anymore. Uh, and anyway, I don't want. As I said, I do not want to belabor that, except to the point that one of the interesting things that, of course, comes up in any stressful situation is once again we're in this funny situation as human beings where we are ourselves wrestling with or seeing the phenomena of ourselves. And you can articulate this in all sorts of ways where there's something like a personality, and the personality has a history or many number of histories, which are, of course, both the kind of material history of this body, came out of other bodies, relationship with other bodies, grew up in certain weather systems, certain geographies, has certain practices, doesn't do other practices. But it's also history as a kind of set of stories. I'm this kind of person. I get this thing. I'll always regret this thing that I did. This was a great thing I did. I'm somebody who likes this. I'm somebody who doesn't like this. All that kind of stuff. We have this personality. And then as we sit and as we trip and as we just reflect on life, I think more and more we see that there's a kind of awareness, maybe even we could even call it a self, that isn't really the same thing as that personality. And or it animates the personality, or it's a more essential core of the personality, but it doesn't necessarily have the identifications that drive that personality. So then we're in this interesting situation of like, how do we deal with this guy or gal or person? that we are and often have to be and are often spontaneously being, and yet there's this kind of interesting space. Now, there's a kind of, there are Buddhist ways of talking about this, and I don't feel like I've really kind of mastered a Buddhist way of talking about things, even though I'm very influenced by Buddhism. And I think one of the reasons that the Buddha Dharma has been so appealing to people in the West is because if you're a modern and you don't really believe in a soul in any kind of traditional Christian sense, and you're largely persuaded by an evolutionary biological account of being, maybe you think there's something more to the self or more to consciousness, but you kind of buy that thing. It's not too much to swallow the idea that as the core kind of, one of the core claims of Buddhism, that there's no self. And of course, it doesn't just mean that there's no self inside the human personality. It's a more general claim that there are no essences to things. So it's not just that, Scott, there isn't really a Scott in there. He's kind of a bundle of habits and language games and appearances that are always changing in time. But it's also that everything is like that. So all of the objects that we populate the world with, both the material objects, the creatures, and especially the abstract ideas we have, don't really have, and you could philosophically say, an essence or a substance. There's no ultimate core that binds the thing together. Instead, there's different ways to talk about it, but the Buddha Dharma pictures a world of vast interdependence, a kind of, you could call it codependent arising is the way that I like to goof with the traditional phrase, which is dependent co-arising. But I think kind of codependent arising is actually kind of funny and in some ways probably more true. We're all like, just as in the weird way that codependency, where you kind of like maintain the fundamental illusion, and both sides of the partnership maintain the illusion in different ways, or they participate in maintaining it. In a way, that's kind of what the Buddhists are saying, is that there's just this vast field of interdependence, and it's absolutely saturated with the illusion, at least from the human perspective, that it's full of these concrete objects, agents, individuals, people, souls, gods, essences, et cetera, et cetera. And it's clearly part of the way we think. And part of the Buddha Dharma is, of course, providing tools and language and ideas and ways to live with the process of what my friend and teacher Michael Taft calls deconstructing the self. That's part of what the path then is. And when I say self in that sense, it means small self, the personality self. And that process of deconstruction, you look at, in many ways, meditation is kind of like that. It reminds me of probably one of my favorite parody T-shirts that I've ever seen, and I was on the skinny teenage dude. It was totally ratty, it had holes in it, but I would have paid $500 for it. It was so cool. It had the Metallica logo. So if you know the band Metallica, it said Metallica, the kind of metal thing. But instead of saying Metallica, it said meditation, but in that letters. And then it had a grave, an open grave, and a cross. And on the cross, it said, "Your ego." But in a way, that's kind of what you're asking for, and it's kind of funny, I think, both in deep psychedelic experience and in the further deeper stages of meditation and certain in the Buddhist path, you start to go, I see what they mean. Oh, I see what they mean about this ego guy not really being actually real. And it's kind of a relief, and it can be kind of terrifying. It can be kind of amazing. It can be kind of, I don't want to say creepy, but like it's a little weird because it's like you're used to this self hanging around. I have a particularly kind of interesting form of it, and we all have versions of this because we are different selves for different people. And so one of the ways you can start sort of loosening the boundaries or enjoying the looseness that's already in your experience is to recognize the different selves that appear in different situations, even situations that are very important to you. You know, obviously, if we go to work and we have to deal with the boss, it's a different self, you know, and it kind of feels me-ish. I can show up there and make jokes and connect with people, but it's, you know, it's got its own sort of rule set. And then there's, you know, the ones with intimate partner, with family, with friends, and also just even with yourself, like the kind of self that shows up when you take a walk in the woods that's maybe of a different variety, or when you get stoned by yourself or take a walk in the woods. So we already have like lots of evidence for these different qualities of the self and the sort of gap between them, which invites us to kind of play with it. You know, the real reason to do this on a concrete, simple level is to relieve suffering. You know, we can talk about metaphysics, we can talk about is there actually an identity, blah, 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 blah. But really what the Buddha is laying out for us, and I think it can be experienced to some degree, even with moderate amounts of meditation and self-reflection, is that a lot of our suffering has to do with just the way that we have ideas about the self or who we are that are not necessary, frankly, get in the way a lot of the time. And that by decomposing them or disidentifying with them, recognizing them as just another thing that comes and goes, there's more space. There's more room to maneuver. There's more of a kind of a looseness about our identifications and about the things that are happening to us. You know, and we all know about like that sense of how like we can be very contracted and then very expansive. You know, again, we take a wonderful walk, maybe with a friend, and we go up and we climb a hill, and you're looking out over a big expanse, and you just had a great lunch, and you know, you're feeling good about everything, and you know, there's a sense of almost a boundarylessness, a kind of like okayness that's open, and you know, you get like, you know, somebody attacks you on social media in a really nasty way that gets you, and you're like suddenly super contracted, and you're very aware of like that, and like da, 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 and you can feel almost the kind of prickliness of the boundary around the suddenly contracted but very animated sense of self, where that you need some kind of protection. You need to like work on the boundary, you know. And so again, just by reflecting on our ordinary life, nothing fancy, nothing about meditation even necessarily, we recognize this kind of like expansive boundarylessness where the walls are thinner, obviously making love, dancing with a crowd. There's this kind of quality of a kind of permeability to the boundary. And then in other situations, fear of death, you know, you're suddenly, oh, I'm going to die. It's just me. Nobody, I mean, everyone else is, but not when I do it. It's just me, just this thing. You know, and it becomes very crisp. So, but the point of it is to recognize that there's already kind of a play, kind of a movement, not something that's solid all the time. So one of the ways of kind of lightly approaching this work of deconstructing the self or of shifting your identity is just to kind of observe the situation as it already is. It's not like a big deal in a way. I mean, to really profoundly experience yourself as not really being a personality takes a lot of work, to stabilize that view, but we get glimpses of it. We can experience it a lot just by observing ourselves more, both on the cushion and, you know, off the cushion. And so I guess one of the ways that I'm talking about it is that it's important to have a view in your head, an idea in your head of what you're doing vis-a-vis this personality. Earlier I mentioned I have a kind of a interesting example of this because I have a public persona, or I have multiple public personas. But I'll particularly talk about the writing person, because the talking person is a little bit more, it's a little bit closer to the non-public person that I am. But at this point, I've been writing so long, and my writing has a very distinct voice, like it's a character, and it's mostly nonfiction. It's mostly me, Eric Davis, writing what he thinks about X, Y, and Z. And it's kind of me, and it's kind of not me. And it's like this simulacrum who's, he's wittier, a little more positive mood, smarter, has better memory, but it's like this really weird relationship where I'm like, it's almost like my own kind of ghost. I'm almost kind of ghosted in this way. And it's been interesting to think about, because sometimes I'm not sure what which the real one is. Um, so all of this is kind of a way of inviting people to think about this meditation of the self, not in some like hardcore psychological way. We're like, okay, we're going to deconstruct our, instead of identifying with this memory, we just sort of recognize it as something that arises, and we have a reaction. Instead of going, oh, I'm angry, you go, oh, I feel this sort of sense of this or that, and you can kind of start to kind of almost analytically deconstruct your reactions as a way to sort of break apart your personality, which wants to hold on to the story. Like, I'm pissed off because they insulted me in social media and they misunderstood me, and they're gonna fucking pay for it, And we all know what that feels like, and we're gonna feel that one again. But what are you gonna do with it? What are you gonna do with the way that kind of rises and falls? And I have to put in a caveat here. I think one, I'm not always convinced that the whole Buddhist picture of the no self is entirely, I don't want to say accurate. It seems pretty accurate to me, but whether it's necessarily a great idea just to be going for that as your goal, to like experience selflessness, to be freed of this personality, or to see the personality as only a construct, an assemblage of different parts of things. And not just Buddhists, but also many philosophers and cognitive scientists, they have that view as well, which is part of the reason a lot of cognitive scientists really love Buddhism, because they're like, well, here's a method to actually see the kinds of concepts about the self that we have. So you have someone like Thomas Metzinger. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Thomas Metzinger. He's a fascinating guy, totally worth tracking this guy down. He has a great, I think Michael Taft interviewed him and has a really great interview, and he's done a number of good podcasts. He's like, cognitive philosopher, very into no self, pretty deep practitioner. He worked with Krishnamurti, but he's also like a, nerdy science guy. He's not interested in anything supernatural, kind of like Sam Harris, except more intellectually refined in a way, more like with a proper sort of philosophical education. uh, and it's just very interesting seeing the way that like the scientific idea and the philosophical idea and the Buddhist practice all sort of allow for this idea of like part of the goal is really just to deconstruct this personality. And it, I don't know. I have some reticence about the way that plays out, in at least in the contemporary Dharma. And there's a couple reasons for it. There's like a religious reason, or philosophical reason, and a kind of personal one. Thanks, Chris. Uh, the personal one is um, that I realized that I've surrounded myself with characters in my life. Like I, the people that I've gotten close to, the person that I married, a lot of the people that I seek out and that I enjoy are full on characters. And I'm not convinced that the way that a lot of people interpret the no self doctrine in the contemporary kind of secular Buddhist mode, I'm not convinced that way of thinking about things supports and nourishes the development of like real rich human character, personality. But I mean character, like a character, like, whoa, that guy's just like there's nobody else like that person. They're full of juice, they're full of whatever. And these views aren't antithetical. So I'm not saying that you have to have an idea of an essential self or an idea of a soul to have a world full of entertaining characters. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that I distrust the way that the no self idea has been rolled out as part of like psychological secular Buddhism. Um, so that's kind of like a personal idea. But theologically, it's actually kind of interesting to think about it this way. It's like, here is a difference with Christianity that really makes a difference. Meaning, I'm not talking about sin, I'm not talking about judgment, I'm not talking about a lot of the ideas that probably maybe some of us have been Christian, maybe we have a little bit of relationship with it, we probably aren't active Christians. In my life, it's been always been something to keep around, though I wasn't really raised with it. But I've gotten a lot out of having a relationship with different Christian traditions, even though I'm not really a Christian, although I do have my own sort of connections with aspects of the tradition. But one thing that you're going to find there over and over in different models is what do we got here? We got yes, that's true. I'll mention that in a second. There's different models of the personality that in most forms of Christianity, the person is essential. The person is what stays. The person is what is encountered and loved by God. It's not about like the person is a veil within which there is this other kind of light or other kind of mind or other kind of awareness, which is the general model that a lot of us work in if we're working with the Dharma. And it's always struck me as a really interesting place to tug because I don't buy it, but I'm attracted by the sort of affirmation of the person that you find in Christianity. And so I kind of, tug and play with this tension, I think, in an interesting way. We can talk more about those ideas after the meditation. Just to note, somebody was talking about, Michelle mentioned about Rob Burbea and soul making and the whole way of the thinking about the psyche, and there, as I said, I'm kind of in a way simplifying a very complicated question because there are definitely ways to come from no self, to come from the lack of an essential object, that there's no soul spark that lasts through eternity, that we are a bundle and still have a very positive, rich, dynamic, personality filled way of moving through the world and even of moving through the Dharma. I think some of the tantric paths where there's such an emphasis on intense emotions and on visualizations of beings and relationships with beings and these sort of these kinds of magical universes that are also, of course, relevant to psychedelic experience, that, that's a place where personality both is and is not. And you get to that really kind of very subtle, paradoxical, playful dimension of the Dharma where things both are and are not. And in a way, that's kind of what we're going for ultimately, I think. But what I want to do tonight is just kind of play with a much simpler question, much simpler, which is that we all have a sense of self right now, probably mostly comes up stronger, lesser, depending on what our circumstances are. But one thing to do that seems part of both, Buddhism and just self-psychology and just growing up and being mature is just getting a very good sense of how that selfhood feels. Where is it located in the body? Where does it show up? where does it become loose? Where does it become strong? Can I move through these spaces and recognize how the self emerges and disappears? I have a meta comment to make before we do the meditation, which is I am my little judgment, which is part of my own ego, is noting that I'm not quite as articulate tonight as I usually am. You may not find that to be the case, but I'm aware of that. And I just need to say this out here, is that I'm tapering off of caffeine. And today is the first day that I haven't had any caffeine. And the funny thing about caffeine is it actually is a cognitive enhancer. It really does make your brain work a little bit better. And so my brain is a little fuzzy. So forgive the if you find this a little bit obscure in some ways. But no matter, we're going to plunge into a meditation on the self. And we'll see where we go. We'll see what we find up. So you can turn off your screen if it helps. Often in this class, I lead you through the physical posture, but tonight doesn't really matter. Just sit as you sit. You can think about this as meditation, but it's just as much about a process of inquiry, which is one of the main tools of exploring the self. It's a wonderful tool. And we'll try to model a little bit of it tonight. So as you settle down, allow that relaxation to radiate through your body, shift into sitting mode. I'm going to take something again from Michael Taft, and he says, what does it feel like to be you right now? Just the way it is. Don't change it, but become aware of it. A sort of vibe of your mood, edginess or peacefulness in the mind. You're so familiar with the you that you are. What's it feel like right now? What phase? What does it taste like? And from there, let's just breathe for a bit. Allow your attention to follow the breath in through the nose, out through the nose. And explore for yourself where the most juicy place to rest with the breath is. Your belly, your lungs, the whole system, your nose. And note the edges of the calm that can descend upon you when you do this, and hopefully is. As elements of your thought, the agitation of thought begin to settle down. And as you move into this settled place, just track how you feel, how that you feels, how the familiarity of the you shifts as you settle down. Come back to the breath. Notice the slight energizing effect of the inhale, the opening of the lungs, and that extra invitation to relax on the exhale. Find that delicious balance of resting and being upright, relaxing and being awake. Keep following the breath until, as inevitably will happen, a thought comes up, a desire, maybe a train of thoughts. That's fine. We almost want that to happen right now because it's an invitation to notice something, which is especially when it's not just a random thought, oh, I got to do this thing tomorrow, but you start to, have some momentum. You think about something you need, something you want to do. It's got some juice in it. Inevitably, because we're meditating, you wake up and you go, oh, I've been thinking, and then you return to your breath, right? Well, this time, notice in that moment of waking up, of becoming aware in a different way, notice what that self, that mind, that person who was caught up with that train feels like. And feels like is the best way to point it out. It's very subtle. So it's not just, oh, I was thinking I'm going to come back to paying attention to my breath. It's almost like the personality was released and was doing its due, planning, desiring, worrying. But what does it feel like in your body? Or what kind of character does it have? What does it have a like a color? I don't know. It's hard to say because part of what you're trying to do is to get intimate with your experience of subtle forms of your ordinary self, like the basic feeling of what it's like to be that self. So let's just return to the breath. Allow attention on the breath to do its magic of quieting and awakening. Pay particular attention to where it feels like the distractions are coming from. Where in the body? In a sense, the sort of the thoughts that capture us are often like little daydreams, and it's worthwhile to think about or remember what it feels like to be awake and then kind of nod out a little bit, and you start to go into a dream, and there's a sense of kind of falling into another world, and you pick up a story kind of midstream, and it makes sense, and you're in that world. Oh, and then oh wait, I'm just kind of nodded out there for a little bit. But you had that feeling of kind of shifting into a dream textured place. In a way, worrying, thinking, desiring, they're kind of forms of daydreaming. It's just that sometimes they're so dominated by analytic thinking and planning that they don't have the dreamy quality. But in some ways, they're very, very similar, or almost the same thing. And so again, as you drift away from the meditation object, you can start to feel what it's like to fall into the dream of the self, or at least that self. Even allow yourself to kind of go with a thought, something that's been coming up, think a little bit about it, and then really ask yourself, where is this happening? Where in my body am I feeling this person talking, this person worrying, this person desiring? Most of us feel it around something around the eyes or in the head, but really try to locate it. It's so familiar, it's hard to do because we're used to just being that, but it is locatable. So again, return to the breath, allow yourself to relax and calm and quiet, and then see who comes up. And if you're not feeling very distracted, there's stability, centeredness, presence with the breath. Then note who's noticing this. Who's aware that there's not too much thinking? Really, who is that? Is it you? And when you ask these questions, of course, there's no answer. They're more like probes that open up a space, sometimes very momentary, of a kind of subtle recognition or a subtle encounter with something that you haven't quite seen before. You've noticed it on the edge of your consciousness or the edge of your awareness. And that's part of what this inquiry practice is. And it's why you can keep doing it, because it's the same question. Where are you? Where are you? So again, whether you are having lots of thinking going on or you're finding yourself quite centered, the main question here before us is to try to see or feel what and where that you is. Where are you? Or perhaps, who are you? Try sitting, breathing, relaxing, and then allowing that question to just arise, whichever one you want, whichever one seems to have more juice for you. Where are you? Who are you? Who is it this, who, thus who comes in a more fancy way? And just see what happens. Don't try to answer it. Just notice if there's a shift, but you got to get behind the question. You got to really kind of go for it. But do the questioning yourself. It's kind of a different way of working because it can be a little frustrating because if you're used to calming yourself with meditation and just being mindful, this is a little bit more can be a little more agitating or frustrating. You're just like, what? I don't know. Who am I? But that's actually kind of part of the pressure of it, uh, is to just return really earnestly, really asking yourself, I mean, don't we want to know? Who am I right now? And the sense that I have of being an I, where is it? Like, is it is it the one who's asking the question? Is it the one who goes, oh, I'm relaxed now? Who am I? Or who am I? There are subtleties in the questions as well, and each facet has its own kind of probe into the presence of who you are right now, or the presence of what is happening in awareness right now. Now let's kind of focus on the sense maybe of where you're most comfortable feeling yourself. And again, for the overwhelming number of people, it's kind of around your eyes or your forehead or the center of your skull. But even there, let's try to tune in. If you had to say where this sense of self is it the eyeball? Is it the sense of sight? Is it like your forehead? Is it even in the body? But it's usually associated with the eyes and with seeing. So it might be easier if you open your eyes a little bit and just kind of go, okay, where there's some noticing here, there's objects, maybe something shifted, someone's noticing this or seems to be telling a story about it. Where is that? Where's that self? And see if you can feel into that quality of identity, that quality of a self, Just allow yourself to sort of, reside there, which is where you reside most of the time anyway. Gather that energy and then allow your attention to fall from your eyes and your head down into your heart. Just move your attention, your sense of focus, your sense of bodily awareness into your heart and see if you can be you from your heart. And if it doesn't work or it's just weird, just notice what happens when you invite that shift. Yeah, the eyes are going on, somebody up there and maybe noticing things, but your you is in your heart. Even invite in some of the tenderness or the sense of sweetness or the sense of yearning that we associate with the heart, that we feel often in our bodies, in our heart area. And just sort of work with that as that's where my self is now. This is the self of the heart. Does it feel different? Is it split? Is there a shift? And you can really emphasize it by breathing in and out of your heart, imagining that when the breath is working, it's just going directly in and out from your lungs through your heart. And as you gather the energies of your body and settle them, there's a kind of focusing there. And again, there might be emotions that come up. You don't have to force anything, but it can be a sweet place to invite a sense of something that's the emotional quality of something that's going on in your life right now. A feeling of tenderness or of concern, of sadness, as long as it's kind of energizing and working in the heart area, but come at it as a self, not the self in the head. Blah, 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 blah. Can we feel the heart as a self? What it would be like to go through your day with yourself in your heart? How hard it is? Dangerous? Beautiful? Now take that energy, that sense of focus, that quality of identity, because in a way that's what we're talking about when I say self now. It's like a quality of identification. Because we can identify with things, those things we identify become absorbed or related to ourselves. So try sinking that selfness, that focus, that energy from the heart down to the pit of the stomach, the hara, the sort of energy center of the lower torso. Allow your focus and the flow of the breath to accentuate that part of your body. Again, you can imagine breathing in and out directly of your belly as a way to charge that zone. And then what would it mean to identify with this sense? The sense of power, of energy, of centering, of will. It's a very different quality, and yet in some traditions, this is really where the action is. It's not in the head, nor in the heart. That this mode of center is the core of the agent, of doing, of being. Feel into what it would mean to come from this place, to be yourself from this place. You might be able to tap into this by, considering times when you've had to really stand up for yourself, or when you've had to be courageous, or when you've had to respond quickly, very quickly, to changing events. And you go, who did that? Where is that located? Is that in my head? Mm, maybe. So again, not just feeling into this place, but feeling into what it would mean to come from here, to be here, to be a self that knows this as its home in the body. So now I invite you to dissolve any particular focus and just rest in presence as much as you're able. Being here now in your body, relaxed, open, integrated. And feel into that sense of self. It might be very subtle now, elusive. Again, it might be very present in a particular part of your body. It's going to be different for everyone. And one very sweet way to tune into this sense of self is to think of a memory from when you were a kid. Maybe not like a little kid, but like, 8, 10 years old, before you were a teenager. Doesn't have to be a big deal, no, nothing, whatever comes up. And then just reflect what is similar between this little kid, probably in some other place decades ago, in my memory, and me now. And if you just let that kind of contemplation happen, like you can't make it do anything, but just sort of bring up the memory and go, who is that? Why is he or she so familiar? And how am I the same as this person in memory? And that sameness can give you a hint and a glimmer of this very subtle sense of self. So try that. And if you get a sense, if a flicker comes up or a quality, a feeling, a vibe, a mood, uh, just appreciate it, recognize it. No reason to deconstruct it, take it apart, even to disidentify with it. We're really just trying to open up to the multidimensionality of selfhood, all the subtle ways it plays and moves through our mind and our body. And finally, bring up a recent challenge. Could be, just a trivial irritation or again, social media comment or somebody at work or some moment where yourself really came forward very strongly. Uh, and you had a very strong sense of like the self that needs to be defended or is being attacked or is being put upon or, um, this tends to come up a little bit more in conflictual or negative situations. But allow that to happen and then just try to kind of go through it again, even replay the scenario and again get a feel for where does that come up. Is it maybe it's a tightening in the jaw, maybe it's like a wave in the chest, a sort of gripping on the arms, and recognize that those manifestations are part of that persona. It's not just like, oh, myself is threatened and you move your body in a certain way. Really feel into how you react in those situations where the self is made very is contracted and quite aware of its boundaries. All right, you can let that go and once again just rest in awareness, in a sense of presence, and notice whether or not you feel like a self, what the boundary of that awareness is like. Is it tight? Is it loose? Is it open? What would it be like to move through our egoic days with that sense of openness? How vulnerable it might be, but also how beautiful, how open to different kinds of connections. So, who are you? And if you don't know, where are you? All right, let's end the meditation there.